So we're heading into an incredible time. We're heading into the Chagim. Lucky for all people who work, it's pretty much slam in the middle of your week, Monday, Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Monday, Tuesday, and a Monday, Tuesday. Lots of work is not going to get done. But hopefully a different kind of work will be done, inner work, growth. Now, we talk a lot about growth and honesty and awareness, but we need to explore that more. What does it mean, a growing person? What's a growing person and what's a non-growing person? Technically, we all change. Circumstances, life, different stages of your life will evolve you. But the difference between someone who grows and someone who doesn't grow is whether they evolve, in other words, it happens to them, or it's a conscious decision, I want to grow. In other words, does life carry us or do we carry it? This morning, someone, as he was leaving Shacharit this morning, one of the great guys that come to Minyan, he says, let's see what the day waits, has for us. And I quipped, I wish I believed it, but I did quip, let's see what we have for the day. In other words, what's going to happen to us is beyond our control. Most of it. I mean, if you treat someone like a jerk, they will respond that way. So that is your fault. But ultimately, the surprises, the things out of the blue are going to happen. But what do we want out of today? Not what does the day want out of us? What do we want out of the day? Not what does life want of us? What do we want out of life? Not in an egocentric, I want life to supply me, but like a decision of agency. It's a big word in today's vocabulary. Taking agency, taking full responsibility for our lives, believing with all our heart that I am not a victim of circumstance, even if the circumstance is as big as COVID. Often when we talk about being a victim of circumstance, we're like, don't worry, just because your mother was abusive, you could be okay anyway. That's the narrative. Don't be a victim of your teacher. No. Don't be a victim of life's circumstances. Don't be a victim of anything that happens to you. Being a victim is the ultimate betrayal of life. And it's very comfortable. I'll be honest, it's great being a victim. You might say, what do you mean great? It's miserable. It's not miserable. It's actually lots of fun in a morbid way. Because if I'm a victim, then the fact that I messed up my life, I'm not responsible. It was that teacher. It was COVID. It was my impossible child. It was my obnoxious marriage. It was my horrible financial situation. What do you want from me? What do you want from me? Rosh Hashanah is a day to show up and say, I am taking responsibility and agency on my life. I will not allow circumstances, no matter how big they are, no matter how overwhelming they might feel, no matter how all-consuming they turn out to be, they will not define the person I am. I will not be a COVID person, a COVID survivor. I am me. And yes, various circumstances come and integrate and come by me and out of me. That's fine. But I stand independent. I am open to learn from every circumstance. I'm not rigid. They say that when there's a storm doesn't knock out, things that are flexible like grass or any tall thing, but it doesn't knock it out, stalks. it knocks down a tree, but seemingly the tree is much stronger than grass, than a small piece of grass. But its strength is its weakness, because it's so rigid that it's instead of going with the wind, it's resisting the wind. So at some stage you have a hurricane, like unfortunately what happened in Louisiana this week. When you have a hurricane or a strong, powerful wind, it will knock it out. Why? Because it's just resisting. So I'm not saying be stubborn and stiff and resisting, no, but go with it. Go with it. Go, let it take you, but still be attached to your ground. COVID might push you, but you're still you're anchored. And the second the storm passes, you're right there. You're the person you always are, and you continue to grow. That ability of being in the ground and flexible and open to circumstances, open to experiences, but not open to take on another victimhood. Not only am I this, and not only do I have this issue, and not only do I have this issue, but we live in an age that loves victimhood. I was talking to a woman earlier this week. She was telling me in her work, the girls at their job, they're always kvetching. Guys will never understand what we have to go through, and guys this and guys that, and it's shame, and we have this issue with our body and they don't, and and it's not fair. And she's like, at the beginning it was a bit convincing. Eventually it just got too burdensome to listen to the whole day. Like, guys, like seriously, you're building your careers. What do you want? What do you want from the guys? Like, what do you like? Now again, yes, is there room for less sexism? Yes, there's room. But the way the world today worships victimhood, it worships it. Tell me, how much of a victim are you? What color skin do you have? What gender do you have? What disabilities do you have? What sexual preferences do you have? Just tell it to me. And the more unconventional you are, conventional obviously being the white straight male, so the more non-conventional you are, the more you are deserving of compensation and absolute, you could get away with murder because you are a victim. And the great sages, not in today's day and age, the great sages of thousands of years ago in the commentaries on the Torah, the Ibn Ezra and others, they say, why was the generation of slaves in Egypt not able to then make it into the Holy Land? Because they had a slave mentality. So therefore they had to die in the desert and get a new chance. In other words, if you feel yourself as a victim, you cannot move on. He says even deeper than that. The Ibn Ezra says, he's one of the commentaries on the Chumash, just like this, not long after Rashi, etc. No, the Middle Ages in Spain. He says the following. He says, why was Moshe, the Redeemer of the Jewish people, a person who didn't grow up amongst Jews? He grew up in the palace of Pharaoh. Doesn't it make sense that he should be familiar with kichel and herring and cholent and all the schmoozing and the Jewish gossip? The poor kid grew up in like royalty, but in a non-Jewish environment. That's the kid that will redeem the people? Says the Ibn Ezra. He says only a person who lives in royalty can teach the children of Israel not to be slaves. In other words, if he had been born a slave, then he would be within the circumstance. He wouldn't be able to define himself. So you needed somebody to come in a place of royalty. Yes, it was a tyrannical regime, but ultimately he grew up and he saw what it means to think big. He saw big headspace. He saw ruling. He didn't see, oh gosh, where am I going to get my next meal? Says Hashem, I want you to teach the Jews how to not see themselves as victims. So I need you to come take out. And the other reason the Ibn Ezra gives is a navi be'iroi. There is no prophet in your own city. In other words, there's a reason why so many leaders often are outsiders. Either they immigrated from other places or they're from different communities. Why? Imagine somebody who grew up in Linksfield Shoal. You knew him since he's in diapers. You remember his bris. Okay, you remember his upshernish, you remember his meltdowns, you remember the mess he made at the bracha. And then 20, 30 years later, he shows up and says, here I am. Can I be your rabbi? It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to respect you. What do you mean, you whippersnapper? I remember when you bullied my kid in shul, you naughty. But somebody shows up from the other side of the planet. You don't know their childhood. You don't remember them running around in nappies. You don't remember their bris. So you see them as an adult and you can get it. And it's a human condition. It's just the way it is. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu had to come from the outside, because Ein Navi B'Yirah, there's no prophet in their own city. Because a prophet in their own city, everyone will say, I remember you. Who do you think you are? Come on. Gosh, you were a nightmare. When did you grow up, huh? Suddenly you're a big thinker, huh? You could barely get out your bar mitzvah speech. You broke your tooth every single time. I had to help you with it, Nachal. In other words, Moshe's gift is that he was an outsider. Now, what's the lesson? The lesson is not to put down the Jewish people. The lesson is to always be a bit of an outsider. Always be a bit of an outsider. And I'll say it again. Always be a bit of an outsider of your own life, of your own circumstances, of everything that's going on with you. Be an outsider. Stand outside the situation. The victim doesn't stand outside the situation. They become the situation. I am this. I am an abuse victim. I am a Holocaust survivor's child. I am a South African with all its things, and I'm a this, and I'm a that. I'm a man, I'm a woman. I'm a victim of a bad marriage. I have difficult children. Whatever narrative we're telling ourselves, I become my problem. Says God, that's no way to lead the Jewish people. You want to be a leader, not of thousands, a leader of yourself, a leader of one. You have to stand outside the reality. You have to be able to be in the darkest places and stand outside of it. Have an imagination that allows you to transport yourself beyond it. And that's why imagination is so powerful, because imagination allows you to be in the worst places and still be beyond it. Because wherever your mind is, wherever the human mind is, say the sages, sham hu nimtza, that's where he's found. In other words, you are not where you are physically. You are where your mind takes you, where your daydreams take you. But daydreams are just by osmosis, just like evolution. They just happen to you. Where you consciously choose to think. I will think about that place. I will think about that memory. I will think about the person I love who's no longer here. And I am with them. I will have to sit in a tent on Rosh Hashanah, but I will imagine I'm in the good old shul with the full-on choir. I will allow my mind to do the magic. I don't need outside things to take me places. I take myself places. That's the power. That's the magic of being an imaginative person, a creative person. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's father-in-law, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, was a very, very creative spirit. His writing is just beautiful, like not just from spiritual, it's just quality writing. He was a writer, he was a poet, he was a very interesting character, very different than his son-in-law. His son-in-law was a doer and a thinker, but not at least he didn't come across as a poet. But his father-in-law, like his writing is very poetic. And he always talks about the power of imagination. And I imagine the reason he talks about it so much is because he was an imaginative character. And he says an imaginative character can transform their life in a moment. In a single moment, they can transport it. And he shared a story that I want to share with you. I think I shared it a long time ago, but definitely not recorded. It goes like this. He says about 200 years ago, 250 years ago, lived a great tzaddik, a holy man, Rab Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. He's known as the lover of the Jewish people, Rab Levi Yitzchak, a great man. He always found positivity within Jewish people. He just had a positive eye. He wrote a beautiful book called Kedushas Levi, and just a fantastic character, the Berditchever. Now, the Berditchever one time took a group of students and traveled to a certain city. Now, that city had a unique circumstance that Jews were not really welcome in the town, although they did work for the local owner of the town. In those days, a mayor wasn't elected, he owned the town, but they lived outside the town. And the main reason was because the mayor had hired for himself a guy that considered himself a former Jew. This guy was a Jewish boy, went to a full Torah education, etc. And then he went through a bad divorce and he just dropped everything and moved to Germany and started acting like a total non-Jew and got very befriended with this mayor. And eventually this mayor, who then moved back to Eastern Europe, took him with him to be his manager. And this guy, although he was Jewish by birth, was a vicious anti-Semite. He hated Jews, so Jews couldn't really live around him. And he had a dog that he trained to hate Jews, like to literally bite Jews. Like he would just send the dog after Jews. And this dog was a nightmare. This guy was a nightmare. It was an absolute crazy. So the Barditchever heads to this town, but instead of heading outside the outskirts of town where the Yiddlach lived, he heads directly to the place where this fellow lives, this manager. Now, this manager hears noise outside. He comes out and he sees this rabbi with a long white beard, and he takes out his gun and presses the trigger. It doesn't work. Presses the trigger again, doesn't work. Meanwhile, the students of the Barditchev are freaking out, like, what is this? Then he kind of puts his gun down to check it, and he presses the trigger, and this time it works, but it kills his dog. And he is crazy. He's like falling apart. He's mad. The dog was his life. And he kind of breaks down and runs into the house. And the Barditchever calls all the students and says, we're going in. They're like, what? He says, we're going in. They go into the house. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak sits down. A few minutes later, this fellow calls him over, the manager, and asks to talk to him privately, and they have a long conversation, a few hours. Finishes the conversation, and this fellow is shaken up, absolutely shaken up. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak goes back to students, and they start preparing for the evening service for Ma'ariv. This fellow goes back to his friends, his Russian, peasants, and they see he's very moved. Very moved. So they ask him, what happened? What happened? What did you experience? He says, I want to give you an analogy, what I experienced by this holy man. He says, remember when we were in the army? Yes. Now, imagine you're a regular foot soldier, just, literally the lowest level. And you have to present yourself to your captain. Do you remember how nerve-wracking that is? They say yes. He says, now I ask you more. Imagine the captain when he has to go to the head of his platoon, how scared he is. And like, he's scared. He says, imagine the head of platoon who has to go to the general of the region. Is that scary? They're like, yes. He says, imagine the general of the region has to go to the head of the army, chief of staff. My gosh. And he says, imagine when the chief of staff has to go present himself to the czar. And then he says like this. He says, but now imagine that the lowly soldier, the first guy, has to present himself to the czar. Can you imagine what he feels? And as he says that, this fellow collapses in a deep faint. They try to wake him up, this and that. It takes a little while, they wake him up. They have a very powerful service together. And the next day he leaves together with Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, with the Barditchva, he leaves, disappears. And many years later, he shows up, and by this time he's happily married with a Jewish woman, fully committed Jew. His kids are all scholars, Torah scholars. That's the story. But the story is not what sticks in my mind. What sticks with my mind is the words that Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak said after he said the story. The Rebbe's father-in-law. He says, do you know why he was able to transform himself from an anti-Semitic thug to a fully committed Jew in just one moment? Because he had the power of imagination. If someone can imagine themselves going to the Tsar and visualize it so clearly that it causes him to faint, that means he can literally create a world in his mind, and therefore he was able to transform his life. And I remember reading that the first time a few years ago and saying, wow, the story is a cute story, a nice story. But to see it that way, to see a Yid that could faint based on their imagination, that means they could create a world based on their imagination. That means they could reinvent themselves based on their imagination. And he says, that's why imagination is so powerful, because you could create your whole world through imagination. So I ask you, in your imagination, this year Rosh Hashanah, where are you? Where will you find yourself? Which world will you be standing in? Will you be standing in a world of COVID, of death, of politics, of fear, of self-pity, of complexity? Or will you be standing in the place you want to be, at the most beautiful moments of your life, at your wedding, at the kotel, at the moments in your life that you felt invincible, at the moments of your life that you felt so much grace, on the moments of your life that you just felt that the sun is shining on you, on those moments that you knew that God was with you, that you didn't doubt for a second, you knew, whether it was when you married off your child, whether it was you were saved from a car accident at the last minute, your life was spared in a miraculous way, when you just found the right person that you want to settle down with out of the blue, whatever it is, at that moment that you knew with out of shadow that God is looking at you and guiding your steps. Let your imagination take you there. And then you can reinvent yourself. Then you could have a Rosh Hashanah that's transformative. Most people think a Rosh Hashanah that's transformative is if I go to 50 shiurim before, and if I learn everything, and that's all great and all important. But you're still locked in your head. Allow your imaginative flow. Imagination is not only art, it's not only dancing, it's not only acting, it's not only music. Imagination is where your mind takes you. Where can you see yourself? Take yourself into that zone. And I'll say even more, when you use this imagination, it allows you to transform the complicated relationships in your life. Why? Because you imagine yourself at the best moment of that relationship. When was that relationship perfect? You live that. You go into there, you feel it. You remember how the interactions were at that time. You remember the flow. And then you can actually then transport it into real life. I've seen it in my life. I've seen it numerous times. I imagined the person I wanted to marry, not what they looked like, but the person they would be. And Baruch Hashem, I got it. I imagined living in New York, I didn't know where, and being in a certain kind of community with certain kind of people, non-judgmental and genuine and just good people, and just a place of that I would feel so myself. And that happened. I remember when I got on the plane, someone asked me, when we moved to South Africa, it's going to be soon 11 years. Ask me, what do you think you're going to get there? And at that stage, I didn't know a soul in South Africa. I'd only been there once for my wedding. I barely knew my father-in-law and mother-in-law, and that's it. Some of their kids. And I told him, I said, I dream that I will work in a high school. And I dream that one day I will be a rabbi of one of the big shuls here. And he's like, but how are you going to do that? How are you going to pull it off? I said, I don't know. But I visualized it. And I created it. And I'm not a believer in karma and God knows what, all these fancy words. I believe that when you imagine it, you then create it. You then make decisions that will take you where you want to go because you visualize your end goal so well that you make choices without even you noticing that take you there, that guide you to the place you want to go. And years ago, I remember in the shiurim on Wednesdays, especially, I used to talk a lot about imagination. It's been a while since I've spoken about it, maybe because I haven't been imaginative. COVID has, kind of, at least if I want to blame, COVID has robbed us. But now I'm realizing, no, why should COVID rob us from imagination? That's the gift. I could still imagine the community the way I wanted it to be an ideal. And yes, I might have to wait for COVID to end, but don't allow the imagination to falter. Don't allow your dreams to falter. Imagine the income you want to earn. Imagine the marriage you want to have. Imagine the relationship with your kids you want to have. Don't just say, okay, I want to have a good relationship. Imagine what it looks like. How do you communicate with each other? When your child's having a meltdown or your grandchild, what are you telling them? When you're renewing your relationship with your mother-in-law, your God knows, your sister, your brother, who cares? What will it look like? How will we engage? Imagine the conversation. And then your life will take you there because you know where you're going. You're confident in your goal. Because you're not scared of it. You're not scared of that moment. You've imagined it 50 times. You've gone through that awkward moment. You've thought about how to address it, and you now are ready. It's like an actor that practices their lines so much that when they now stand in front of the camera, they're not insecure. They know their lines. They know their moves. They know how, their facial expressions. And then they just allow it to flow. Imagine. Don't allow COVID to take away your power of visualization. And this Rosh Hashanah, at least for a few moments, lock yourself in a room or even sit in the corner of the shul, whatever. Put the siddur in front of your eyes and don't just pray and beg. Don't only ask God what you want from him. Ask you what you want from you. In other words, many of us just spend the whole Rosh Hashanah begging, please God, nachas, please God, money. And that's all good, it's important, it's nice. Please God, a relationship, please God, I want to grow. Have a conversation with yourself. Hashem, within me, my neshama, and ask myself a simple question. Which place do I want to be in 1 year? How are my relationships, each one of them? How is my self-esteem? How is my finances? How is my energy? How is my flow? How is my health? How is my look, my weight, whatever? How am I? Imagine it. Allow it to become so transformative that you actually just get lost in that imagination. And it will happen. It always does. It will happen because that is the power of imagination. When you create something in your mind, you become an architect, just like an architect. They have to first imagine in their mind, then draw it, and then it becomes a reality. Dream it, imagine it, talk about it, and then allow the building to build. So here's my prayer for us, each and every one of us, as we go into Rosh Hashanah. Don't be a victim. Be a visionary. Don't feel sorry for yourself, but rather use the power of your imagination to take you out of the darkest hole. Because it's not fantasy. It's reality. We create our circumstances. And if if you find yourself in similar patterns of dysfunctionality, certain relationships over and over and over just get dysfunctional, financial dysfunction, whatever dysfunction you have, self-esteem dysfunction, if you just follow yourself in certain patterns, it's time to not only work hard, it's time to imagine hard. Imagine yourself out of that situation. In other words, I'm saying imagine as a verb. Imagine yourself out of it. Let your imagination take you out of it. So my wishes to you is happy thinking, happy imagining, happy recreating. If God could create this world anew on Rosh Hashanah, so can you. May our new world, may your new world be the most wholesome, beautiful, and blessed. God bless you.